Words, words, words. That's what it's all about. This week's parasha and some of the events during this past week. This week's parasha. Words appear right at the very beginning of the penultimate or the second last parasha of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, which we are going to conclude reading this week, and it's therefore called Shabbat Chazak, as every time we conclude the reading of one of the books of the Torah, we say the words Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek, let's be strong. And hence we conclude Bamidbar this week. And as I said, the second last parasha is called Mattot, which is about words. It opens up on the very issue of words, for it is talking about V'yidaber Moshe. God spoke to the Roshei Matot. He spoke to the heads of the tribes, telling them, when you take a vow, when a person takes a vow, be very careful about the vow that you are about to take, about the promises you are about to make. Why? Because lo yachel devaro, don't go back against your words. Don't desecrate your words literally. Why? Whatever comes out of your mouth, do it. You make a promise, make sure that you follow through on it. And therefore, before making a promise, before making a vow, think whether you can do it, whether you want to do it. Words matter. But what are they doing here, right before the conquest of the land of Israel? Why now talk about vows? One suggestion is that the people of Israel needed, as it were, to be worded up. They needed to be reminded that the words that they were now going to make were not just as a group of tribes, were not just as individuals, but the words they were going to be using in the future were the words of a nation, were the statements of a nation, the policies of a nation. And we all know that words that are spoken by people who represent a country have far more resonance, far more import to them than just the words that we ourselves make. So they were being reminded at this stage. And it's interesting because it is in this week's parasha as well that we read about, in Matot, we read about the conquest or the battle against Midian and the death of a man called Bilam. Bilam, as you will recall from just a few weeks ago, was a wordsmith. He was the man of the word. He was the man who was called in by the king Balak in order to go out there and curse the people of Israel. Instead, his words, instead of being a curse, landed up a blessing. But Bilam's plan had been, in fact, to undermine the people of Israel, to cause as much harm and damage to them. That's what certainly why he was hired by Balak in order to do that. And he himself had perceived that and Balak, the king of Moab, said, you know, the people of Israel, their power, their strength seems to lie in the fact that they got those 10 words. Aseret Dibrot. They got those 10 commandments at Sinai not long ago. That seems to be their strength. They are, as we would later be called, the people of the world, the word, the people of the book. So Bilam went for what he said, let us attack them at their strongest point and make that into their Achilles heel. And Bilam died in this week's parasha, telling us again, reminding us again of the power of a word. And if you're not convinced of the power of a word, just look back on the events of this past week. Look back and think about what took place as a new member of parliament. A Muslim member of parliament was sworn in the Australian parliament by Kevin Rudd into his new cabinet, and the reaction and response to that when he took his swearing in, he did it on a Quran. There were some scurrilous comments that this elicited from people, particularly in Facebook, and people making comments about how shocking it was and that it should not have been allowed. People, I believe, using their words with a lack of care, with that carelessness, with malice in mind. And there we see how words they were being used in order to abuse and in order to harm others. Words can be used to heal, but words can be used to harm. The recent scandal with Snowden about releasing all those documents is also about, well, what do we release? Which words do we want to be out there in the public? Which words of ours? Which things of ours? And the word that is used for word and thing is exactly the same in Hebrew. Davar and is a thing, but it is also diber, is to speak. And so the way that we can do so much harm through the words that we release to others. So if there's one thing that you're going to take, only one thing you're going to take from this week's parasha, it is that reminder what it said, and I'll say it again. Whatever comes out of your mouth, do. Don't just use words, but act on your words. And more importantly, think before you use that word. Shabbat Shalom.